And we begin with Herman Cain, fresh from the dog track, taking the Cain train to Alabama for some time in Talladega. The rising star of the GOP is making 4 stops in Alabama today, including Talladega, McClellan, Homewood, and a meeting of the Rainy Day Patriots in Birmingham. That sounds big, especially in a crucial battleground state like Alabama. Wait, no, Alabama is not a swing state, is it? Not even close. But the primary is coming up. It's right there after Iowa, New Hampshire, South Carolina, Florida, Wyoming. Yeah, just a lot of states, really. The Virgin Islands as well. March the 13th. Right, well, campaign strategy be damned. Cain has an important message on the economy. For starters, taking a hatchet to 10% of all federal agencies. But hang on, aside from the Postal Service, the federal government is the nation's largest employer. Mr. Cain, what about all those workers?
The skeptics will say, well, you know, it's not that easy to fire federal workers. I'm going to give them a choice. Early retirement or reassignment. They said, well, where are you going to reassign them? I understand that there's an empty building in Nome, Alaska.
Well, how's that for a fright? Happy Halloween to you, Mr. Cain. And if that didn't get the Tea Party crowds fired up at breakfast, by lunchtime there was talk of abolishing the federal government altogether, with a little help from the Declaration of Independence.
It says, when any form of government becomes destructive of those ideals, it is the right of the people to alter or abolish. We've got some altering and abolishing to do.
Absolutely. It begs the question, though, what exactly does Herman Cain want to be the president of? But as we know, the godfather of pizza does do things a little differently, as evidenced in his campaign ads. And if you thought his cigarette-puffing manager was bizarre, just take a look at this.
Okay, punk, get real. I stand with Herman Cain, because Herman Cain stands with us.
Absolutely. That ad courtesy of Weird and Weirder. To help us sort out the many mysteries of Herman Cain at the end of this busy week, let's bring in our political panel now. Goldie Taylor is a columnist at thegrio.com, and with us from Washington, MSNBC political analyst Karen Finney. And Karen, if I can start with you. Before we come to Mr. Cain himself, Mark Block, his chief of staff, who smokes in the advert, also has an interesting personal history. Banned for 3 years and fined $15,000 for voter suppression campaign in Wisconsin. We reported that earlier this week. I think we were one of the first to do so. But there's also a tax warrant from the IRS for an unpaid bill, and he's been arrested twice for drink driving. So he's a chain-smoking, drunk-driving operative who doesn't pay his bills.
And wouldn't he make a great White House chief of staff?
Don't you think?
Oh, my goodness. You know, I will say the drunk driving, obviously not good, but the thing that I find most disconcerting is that this is someone who has a record of disenfranchising voters, of actively trying to stop people from voting. And so for Herman Cain to think that that individual is appropriate to have on his ticket, now granted that this gentleman has predominantly focused on the Democratic Party and the base of the party, African American, Latino, and youth voters and seniors in their tactics. But I find that very appalling and a real lapse of judgment on the part of Mr. Cain.
It's really staggering. Goldie, is Herman Cain serious about winning primaries if he makes 4 stops in Alabama, a state that votes after the Virgin Islands, and he's been in 18 states in the last month, but only 3 in total include visits to Iowa, New Hampshire and South Carolina? Is he serious?
Well, I'll tell you this. It takes both money and organization to win primary elections and primary caucuses. You know, in Iowa, New Hampshire, Florida, South Carolina, 4 of the key states that are up front.
Absolutely.
There's no organization, no staff there, no way to turn out voters for caucuses. And so those kind of things that are just patently missing. And he shows up in Tennessee and then Alabama, says something about Herman Cain. Either one, he has a very incompetent national staff, or 2, he ain't running. And I think it's the latter.
You don't think he's running?
I don't think he's running. I think he's selling books.
Karen.
Yeah, I think Goldie's right in the way that I think Herman Cain is kind of, maybe he's coming out with a new show because he's kind of become the Donald Trump in this race, and that it's just hard to take him seriously. However, there's one thing for us to consider, and that is he's going to places where he can raise money. Clearly, in Texas, he was able to raise some money. He's got some fundraisers in Alabama and some fundraisers in Tennessee. So part of it is money. The second thing that occurred to me is going to Alabama, the state party chair there is very excited to have him, and they're trying to do a lot of events. I'm wondering if perhaps he wants to try to make the case that he can appeal to white Republican voters in the South as a way to, again, sort of prop up his viability argument for his candidacy.
Karen, I keep reading that Herman Cain is the counterintuitive anti-candidate, a man who wants to turn upside down the orthodox approaches to campaigning. Approaches, of course, that you know all about. But so far, his policies say that the jobless should blame themselves, illegal immigrants could get eaten by alligators in a border moat, and the right of women to choose should not be allowed, even in cases of incest. Is that his vision of Cain country?
Apparently so. That is his vision of America. And, you know, Martin, I was thinking it'd be interesting. I hope somebody asked him the question of what he thinks about the immigration laws and what's going on right now in the state of Alabama. Is the idea we're just going to import a bunch of alligators to go after the people? I mean, is that it's a very bizarre thing. You know, there's one thing to be a non-traditional candidate and to say, you know, we got to let this person be their person. But that's part of what a good campaign staff is supposed to do, is to figure out how do we put this individual in the settings where he or she can really shine, people can really get a sense of who they are and what they stand for. That's not what this campaign seems to be about. It seems to be more about selling books, as Goldie was saying, and just getting publicity and attention rather than the serious business. I mean, does anybody take any of his ideas particularly seriously?
Well, I have no idea. He's getting lots of money. Goldie, you saw Apostle Claver, and indeed you wrote about him as a warm-up act for Herman Cain, blaming Democrats for being racist, saying they're the party of the Ku Klux Klan, even making deeply offensive remarks about academics like Professor Cornel West. He called him, and he's a guest on this show regularly, a gap-toothed liar. Who is that kind of language appealing to?
I think that kind of language is meant to appeal to the Republican base. But I think at the end of the day, candidates like that are going to find themselves in a very ironic position when they're using this kind of language to so-called get that base to vote for them, and then they don't. Because at the end of the day, people really do see through that kind of theater and language. You know, you can make things sound pretty, but for so long, when people start looking at your substance, where do you stand on Gitmo? Where do you stand, you know, on Iraq and Iran? Where do you stand on Pell Grants? Where do you stand on immigration?
Just last night, he said that he wants to slash the federal government's grants for students, and that includes Pell Grants.
And so he's alienated Latinos, he's alienated African Americans, he's alienated every middle-income family in this country that depends on Pell Grants. Who's going to be left? The smokers' lobby?
Probably.
But, you know,
very quickly, Karen.
Very seriously, and this is a little harsh, but one of the things about Herman Cain is I think that he makes that white Republican base of the party feel okay, feel like they are not racist because they can like this guy. I think he is giving that base a free pass, and I think they like him because they think he is a black man who knows his place. And I know that's harsh, but that's how it sure seems to me.
Well, thank you for spelling that out. Karen Finney and Goldie Taylor, thank you for joining us.